Alan, thanks for joining me. Thanks for being a part of NFT.NYC this year. I would love for you to introduce yourself to those in our community, this type of things that you are thinking about and working on with ENS and Web3 in general. I'm excited to dive into that. Why don't you give us a little background about who you are?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Ian. I've been in crypto since 2017. Sort of caught the bug then and never left the space, and just been really excited to be here. Currently, I'm the director of Web3 operations for VaynerNFT, and also, worked on different projects in the space outside of the scope of VaynerNFT. I was within the HashMask community manager at some point. Also doing some projects tied to Web3 identity and activity and things like that. So just really like where the space is as it relates to NFTs, and sort of where NFTs are really just driving the Web3 space. I see like NFTs pushing Web3. So just very excited to sort of be part of that journey.
Yeah, Avery and the entire VaynerNFT team were really important to our event this last November. I know that you were there, so that was nice to have you there and have you come back again and talk a bit about kind of, your view of how things are changing and how NFTs are kind of a forerunner, as you're saying, right? Setting the standard and drafting the rest of the crypto DeFi industry into the mainstream. Can you just give your perspective, like, hey, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, and this is kind of where we're at on the bridge between 2 and 3, and how maybe the ENS domains play into where we're at and where we're going? I'd love to get your insights on that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think if you just look at how we get into different systems and networks, with Web 1, it was like username and login. And then with Web 2, we've become very familiar and comfortable with like Twitter, sign in, Facebook, sign in, even your Google account, sign in, right? So you get to sign in with all these accounts, but they're essentially, you're signing into a closed data network, as I would call it, right? So this closed data network, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they all essentially have complete control of your data, your activity, and everything, right? And they get all the benefits of that. So these closed data networks led to closed experiences tied to your identity, which is really spread across a lot of different social media platforms, right? What we have with Web3 is completely flipped of that. We have an entire scenario where there's open data. Now, everyone can see the data. We have ENS, which lets you sign in once to everything. Not only can you sign into like Ethereum, but you can also sign into Polygon or other layer 2s with new recent ENS development. So I think what we're seeing is you can have one identity that you can tie to an ENS domain, which makes it human readable, right? And then you can now sort of get people to look at your Web3 activity in a way that you want to potentially display it or give them, everyone can see it. But I think the gap in where NFTs are really going to drive this space is how identity is defined, whether it's like with an avatar or not, what's in your wallet, right? Essentially, your wallet becomes what your phone was in the Web 2 world. Your wallet is sort of like that Web 3, like, this is who I am, and people can go and look at it if you want to tie it to your person, or maybe you have multiple addresses. So I think the infrastructure is getting streamlined, and we'll be redefining what is sort of like Web3 activity, Web3 identity, and how you present yourself. And ENS underlies all that. I know it sounds kind of kludgy right now, but that's really where I see that. And I see NFTs driving that in this entire space forward with that, because people are more comfortable with NFTs are really just containers for unique items. And unique items are just something that people are used to dealing with in their day-to-day lives, right? And I think that's just going to be driving a lot of the conversation forward.
So what's something or some things that maybe you have a different perspective on than the general consensus with those building the industry? Because, this is not a 101 environment, right? We're not teaching people about this stuff for the first time. Most people that come to NFT.NYC are the builders, the buyers, the artists, the investors. And so what thing or things in your perspective really ring true that you don't really see others talking about, or consensus, and I'd love to just get some insight into why you see things a bit differently than others.
Yeah, I think I look at sort of the markets as a good thing in this space. I think if you look at what you see on mainstream news, when things are high, they just focused on the price. And then things are low, they just focus on, oh, this is down 90 something percent. And I think it's always presented in a sort of good or bad way. And I look at the markets as part of just the way this space operates. We have systems and networks that are really tied together. We have markets that are literally on 24 hours a day. Anyone can come in at any time and sort of conduct a transaction, whether that's a DeFi, buying NFTs. So recognizing that shift in 24-hour global markets, I think is sort of seeing that as a good thing, and just sort of embracing the fact, even in the art world, that changes the dynamics of how people conduct business, how things happen. I think I look at that very differently. I think a lot of other people sort of like demonize that approach. I view the markets as like just another real raw signal to a lot of different things that are happening, right? You look at like the whole PFP and avatar craze, and people are like, oh, I don't like the art, right? And you always talk about, oh, like that art is not great. I think the art is irrelevant, right? So even on my Twitter, a lot of times I'll say, oh, you thought it was about the art. It's literally never about the art. It's about the narrative. It's about sort of what the community is buying into. And unfortunately, the art is irrelevant. That's not to say that art has no place. It definitely does. But as with everything else, it's just what's the narrative you're creating around yourself as an individual artist, or around your project, and what's sort of like that value proposition you're bringing. So we're just redefining how people conduct business. And I think that's something we should embrace, whereas I think a lot of people are spending that time trying to fight that dynamic versus sort of realizing the benefits of it.
Most of what we talk about in the industry has to do with how we're using this technology. We want to, our peers, kind of this, call it the first world market. But 2/3 of the world is developing, right? Yep. Maybe they don't have good internet, or they don't have it at all. Maybe the average income is $1 a day or $10 a day. Yep. When this matures, and this technology is not about speculative investing, it's about supply chain management and automation, removing middlemen. How do you see it playing out in the 2/3 of the world that's developing over the kind of the future? Because I think that's
I love that question. I feel like one of the things I see on CT, and those CT is crypto Twitter or NFT Twitter, whatever you want to call it, you know, people always talk about fair pricing, and they were like, oh, 0.05 is fair, 0.1 is fair. And it's just like, that's a couple $100. If you zoom out outside of what is probably where you live, which is probably America or Western Europe, where you think a couple $100 is fair pricing, you will see that some people, that's their entire month's salary, right? The vast majority of the world functions on a very small fraction of like the entire, like of what you think is a fair mint cost. So even the whole concept of like, we have this dogmatic number of 10,000 PFP projects or avatar projects, right? If it's above 10,000 or 15,000, like we can't go above that number. And it's like, how do you think we're going to scale this to millions of people who already, it's prohibitive where the Ethereum gas price doesn't work for them, right? How do people join a community if they've got to spend 1/3 of their paycheck just to be able to even free claim something, right? So I think moving away from these dogmatic numbers, which are honestly more driven on like market speculation, which I get, and changing the narrative of like, all right, I want to get a community of 1 million people. And I don't care if they get something for free or they're paying like $5 for it. I think that narrative is how we get to the next level. How do we really stop saying numbers or like, oh, 0.05 ETH is a fair mint? No, it's fair in your context, but probably in the vast majority of the world, 0.05 is like a lot of money, and that's not fair, right? So I think fair is always sort of relevant to sort of how your point of reference. And I think we're going to grow NFTs to the rest of the world by being realistic around their onboarding costs, being realistic about the cost to actually engage, and really lowering that barrier of entry for everyone. And if you're looking to make money, you can still make money. You're just probably going to make money with like millions of people paying you a couple dollars versus like a few thousand people paying you like $5,000, right? So you can still do it. It's just that the infrastructure doesn't quite scale to like tens of thousands of people or even 1 million people yet, but we're quickly getting there with like layer 2s on Ethereum, sidechains on Ethereum, what Polygon is doing, things like Lens protocol. So we'll get there. I just think that's how we get this blown out to like where we're talking about millions and millions of users within like some sort of ecosystem or platform.
One of the main themes that we have at the event this year is diversity. The diversity of utility, the diversity of projects, the diversity of approaches. What's happening in the industry right now that really rings the bell as new and diverse and creative that's coming to the top of mind for you?
I think it's just more so the fact that there's a lot of work going around into involving people into the community and trying to educate and onboard them. So if you look at platforms like Clubhouse, and the Twitter Spaces, and there's a lot of free material out there and trying to connect people into understanding, like, I know this sounds foreign to you. I know it sounds like something overbearing, but there's a lot of like people and material that's out there that can really onboard you into this space in a way that if you want to put in the effort, you're welcome in here, right? And we're doing that at a global level. And I think that's when I think about diversity, it's less about like your gender or your race, your ethnicity, religion. It's just like the diversity in which people can like enter this space and feel like they're included. And more importantly, Web3 is wide open, as I was saying earlier about open data. If you want to build something, if you want to join, be a community manager, this space is open and you can work from anywhere. So I think the diversity of not just even like just people being consumers or like buyers or even builders, but it's also people, just the diversity of like anyone can join anything. It doesn't really matter where you are. No one really, people might take this the wrong way. People care far less about who you are and maybe what your identity is. And I'm not saying your identity is irrelevant. Well, they care more about what you can deliver and how you become part of the team, right? So we've sort of have this opportunity to abstract away, I think, some of the things that sometimes sort of lead to sort of a lot of turmoil in even workplace environments, and just sort of reconnect in a way that we weren't able to before. I think Web3 and NFTs are going to drive that a lot.
So what do you think about the people being doxxed or projects being built around personality? Obviously, Gary would be the prime example of VeeFriends built around his personality. He created the artwork and everything's kind of built around him. And then there's other projects that their creators have never doxed themselves, don't intend to. So being what you just shared about, it's about not about the person, right? Give me a little insight on docs, versus not docs, and go around a personality versus not.
I think everything comes with trade-offs. And I think there's this one idea that people have in their head that, oh, because you're doxed, I have some sort of recourse. That doesn't actually mean that you do. They could be in a jurisdiction that just is not going to support your, in the worst case scenario, right? The option of not being doxed and that option of getting to various points of success in this space without being doxed, I think is a good thing, right? I think we have to retrain our sense of like personal responsibility if it's from an investment perspective. And when I say investment, it's not just money, it's also time, right? So like, if you're wary of someone because you don't know who they are and you care more about who they are versus what they're delivering, right? And their track record, because you could, and I'll use someone who has been in the space for a long time. He's not doxed as far as I know, not so fast. He's been in the space for a long time. He has credibility, right? He's done a lot of different things and you may not know who he is, but he has a track record, which is essentially based on his Twitter persona. I'm sure he's done things like in different communities in Discord, right? Whereas me, I've been in the space for like the last 5 years. I've always been doxed. My full name is there, right? So I think it's just trade-offs. What's the risk that you want, right? And I think people 100% deserve their right to privacy and don't need to be doxed in a way. If you don't like the fact that you don't know someone's identity, then you can choose to not to involve yourself, your time and or money in that project, in that community. And I think what Web3 really enables is choice and options. And I will always fight against sort of forcing people to, for instance, the whole concept of KYC. I don't think you always need to know everything about everyone before you can engage in some sort of business with them. I think give people the option. If you require KYC, great. I have the option to not do that. And if you don't want to do that, have the option to not engage if I don't know who you are, right? So we have different sort of breadcrumbs that we leave digitally on social media with our Web3 behaviors. You can see when people like make certain, like a lot of people get exposed as scammers because they have these different addresses, and you guys got people like Zach XBT who would like do the investigation, but like, here's a scammer. So like, you can get exposed even if you're not doxxed, right? So to finalize the answer there, I definitely think people have a right to remain private and disclose what they want to disclose. And it's, as investors with time or money, we have to basically decide if that trade-off is worth it for us.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap our conversation. I like your perspective. I'm glad I asked that question. Well, Alan, thanks for what you do in the industry. I know you're not new to this. You've been around for several years and have brought a lot of insight and productivity in terms of what people have worked on and thought about. Look forward to seeing you in New York, June 20th to the 23rd. That's kind of hometown for you and your team in that sense. So I'll be looking forward to that. And for everybody that's watching our conversation, thanks for your attention. And we look forward to seeing you in New York. Have a great day, everybody.
Awesome.